Welcome back everybody, I'm Foster Turtle, but you can call me Foster. I recently teamed up with Sid Fish and MightyJor to make a game for Vimjam2, a game jam that gives you 10 days to create a game based on a requirement and a theme. Sid Fish reached out to me a few days before the jam started to let me know that he was putting together a team to make a game, and asked if I would come on board as the artist. He filled me in that MightyJor would be working on the music and sound effects, and I was super honored to be invited onto the team as I followed both of their work in the past. They're both super talented devs, and I've linked both of their channels and itch pages in the description. I was feeling a little out of my depth, but super excited to be a part of this team. Here's a quick preview of what we came up with before we get into it. On the day the theme was announced, Sid Fish, MightyJor, and I hopped into a Discord call to brainstorm ideas. After tossing around a few ideas like creating a boss rush game or a task management game set in an office space, Sid Fish tossed out an idea that took us in a completely different direction.
You are a toy! You are a child's plaything!
We all liked the idea and set to work refining the story and game design elements. We decided the player would play as a toy named Jack, trying to escape a toy box as the little boy tossed in toys from above. Limiting our setting to the toy box would help us avoid scope creep, since the whole game would be set in one level. For gameplay, our aim was to marry precision platformer mechanics with a Metroidvania-style progression system. Sprinkle in a bit of rage game mechanics instead of a health system, and we had our foundational ideas. Looking back on the game jam as a whole, I don't think any major design decisions could be attributed to just one of us. I'm super grateful that I had the opportunity to work on a team that prioritized collaboration and building on each other's ideas.
Suits me. I'm voting for yours truly.
Well, I'm voting for yours truly too.
Okay, I'm with you fellas.
With a solid idea and the start of a story under our belts, we split off to work on our respective parts. I was working as the artist and animator for the project, so I sat down to brainstorm some character designs, while Sid Fish got to work implementing player movement and MightyJor started on the music. I'd like to highlight two things about the character design process that stuck with me through this project. When you're designing your characters, don't be afraid to scrap ideas completely, or mash two of your ideas together. The more you iterate on a character, the stronger your final design will be. I ended up taking my initial character designs and squashing them together, leading to a stronger final design than either of my initial ideas. When we first started toying with the idea of having the main character be an action figure, MightyJor had the idea that he could be made up of cobbled together toys. I wanted to preserve that idea at least a bit as I settled into the final designs for the character. I also tried to emphasize Jack's personality and story through his design. Giving him little strings below his eyes could imply his expression, and the squashy part of his little hoodie could emulate eyebrows to make him look sad. Iterating on your designs goes for color too. I tried on 7 different local color palettes before settling on one that I felt fit the character best and was most appealing. For Jack, I wanted to push the cute elements in his design as far as possible to try to help the player really empathize with him.
Sir, I must have that pig.
Here's your pig!
Everything is different now.
The second thing I want to hit on is animating with personality. You can communicate a lot through static design, but the ideas you're communicating become even stronger when you tie your animation to the personality of your characters. For Jack, I wanted his head to bob up and down with this innocent, jaunty sort of feel when he moved. I hoped this would push the player to connect with him even more. To achieve this, I leaned primarily into 2 of the 12 principles of animation, squash and stretch. Squash and stretch help communicate mass and momentum to the viewer. The more squash and stretch you apply, the softer an object seems. So by applying these two principles liberally to Jack's head, we can communicate a sort of plushy feel to him. As a bonus for game animation specifically, start your idle and run cycles with the downward movement of the character, so that when they transition from a falling animation, it lends impact to the landing. Now when the character transitions between animations, the movement will feel more natural, and the transition will flow more smoothly. That said, Sid Fish took the animations and pushed them to the next level by applying a bit of squash effect in the game engine when the player impacts the ground. This works together with the animation to really help sell the idea. With smaller characters, over-exaggerating their motion is sometimes necessary so the player can really track what is happening. Don't be afraid to exaggerate your animations and test them out to see if the ideas you're trying to convey are better communicated. The easier a player can track what is happening, the more fair the gameplay will feel. To find examples of this, you need look no further than classic cartoons. With a good amount of the player animations mocked up, we wrapped up the first day, checking back in on everyone's progress. Sid Fish already had some solid player movement implemented, and MightyJor already had a base for the main theme of the game. We were off to a solid start. If you've followed my channel for any amount of time, you're probably aware that I'm much more comfortable drawing characters than backgrounds, so the thought of digging into backgrounds was daunting. On top of that, MightyJor had fleshed out the story, and we needed a way to communicate it to the player, so we settled on cutscenes, another big undertaking. We had already made a ton of progress on the project, and I was getting excited as our game started to take shape, so I dug right in. I started to work on the backgrounds by sketching out the toy box floor and walls and breaking them into smaller components. That way Sid Fish could make the box as wide or as tall as we needed it to be. I also set to work sketching the shelves that would act as the platforms for Jack to traverse across. For the back of the toy box, I wanted to get that corkboard feel, so I used a technique where you grab a stock photo of a texture and overlay it on your image. To help it blend with the rest of the scene, I pulled the opacity to around 15%. I used this technique again when working on the cutscenes, adding a film grain to each of the images to try to emphasize that cinematic feel. Speaking of the cutscenes, I'd like to highlight another art tip that was super helpful while working on the still images for the game. To give some context, 5 days into the jam, I took a trip home to visit family and knew I wouldn't have a ton of time to work on the art. I needed a way to speed up my workflow. I'd given my teammates a heads up about the trip and had scheduled everything out so that I had finished a majority of the art before I left. However, the progress that we made in the first 5 days had me really excited about the potential of the game, and I wanted to make sure that I could hold up my end and get as much of the remaining art done as possible and make it look good to boot. I've been watching a lot of Drawfee lately.
Welcome to Drawfee, where we take your dumb ideas
and make even dumber drawing.
I nabbed a super useful tool from a recent episode that saved me a lot of pain when it came to making cutscene art. There's a technique called thumbnailing, where you draw on a much smaller canvas and nail down the composition, tone, and general feel of a piece, and then blow it up onto a larger canvas to refine your line work and finalize the piece. Thumbnailing gives you a ton of control and lets you iterate on your ideas at a much faster pace than when you work on a much larger canvas.
You guys remember from earlier?
This ended up being invaluable from a collaboration standpoint too, because even though not all of the cutscene art was finished, MightyJor could put thumbnail images in and work out how it would feel in the game. In that sense, an important lesson I took away from this jam is that not everything had to be 100% perfect when I sent it over to Sid Fish and MightyJor. We could always go back and refine elements that needed fixing when it came to polishing the game.
Let me workshop this hand real quick, because I don't like it. Where did the thumb go? Hey,
Yeah.
fixing it in post is calling.
With a good amount of the jam behind us and the game starting to take shape, let's highlight some of the awesome things that Sid Fish and MightyJor had been up to. Sid Fish worked on building out the movement system, while MightyJor built out the menus and a speedrun timer. Sid Fish added controls allowing the player to look up and down and implemented visual feedback for your double jump and dash being used. MightyJor knocked out a ton of level design, built the collectible system, and started to scatter the collectibles through the map. Sid Fish had also created an entire drop shadow system to help distinguish foreground elements, and MightyJor had added controller support. On top of it all, both of them had put in time working on lots and lots of debugging. It amazes me how many little quality of life touches they both worked on to make the game not only playable, but also enjoyable. There are so many little details, some behind the scenes, that most players won't even notice, but that will enhance their experience with the game so much. Needless to say, I'm super grateful to have been a part of this team.
Am I getting catfished here, or any powers you want to tell us about? Any,
No, I don't have one. I just saw the ad.
I ended up making a lot of art for this jam, so let's speed run through some final thoughts and tips before wrapping things up. These tips are things that I was keeping in mind while working on the art, or lessons from the jam that I intend to take into future projects. Isolate colors on your color palette for important things in your scene. This blue and this green were off limits in all the art except for the character art, so we could be sure that the character would pop against the background. Distinguish other elements visually by rendering them in a different way from the rest of the art in the game. We put a white outline around all of the upgrades to help draw the player's eye. Add highlights to things that you need to stand out, but also want to keep visually consistent. The collectibles, tax, and late game power-ups all use highlights to help the player notice them amongst everything else on screen. Animate things that you need the player to notice. Movement will help draw the player's eye. Sid Fish applied a sine wave to the upgrades and collectibles, giving them a consistent motion. Lighten or desaturate elements that you need to fade into the background. Sid Fish altered the initial background toy images to help distinguish foreground and background elements to help the player identify what they can and can't interact with. Use ease in and ease out principles for effects animation to make them flow more smoothly. Ease in describes starting your motion slowly and speeding it up, and ease out describes allowing the motion to slow before ending. This technique works really well for things like effects or more organic motion. Don't save your itch page art and thumbnail art for the very end of the jam. Thumbnail art is the first impression that gets someone to click on your game, and making the page itself look professional will help give players confidence that you invested ample time into the game. Use your page to telegraph what gameplay will be like. Even if most people don't notice, it can go a long way towards helping the player know what to expect from your game.
It's like, I'm picking up these things, and I am jumping.
Pick a unique font that fits the tone of your game. This one may seem simple, but it can go a long way towards making your game feel polished, and is an important part of your visuals. Lastly, remember that when you're making art for games, it is there to serve the gameplay. The art that you make should make the game more digestible to the player and add an extra layer of polish that doesn't detract from the gameplay mechanics.
What are you drawing?
A liger.
What's a liger?
It's pretty much my favorite animal. It's like a lion and a tiger mixed. Bred for its skills and magic.
It's been a couple of weeks since the jam ended, and the atmosphere around it seems to be winding down. I'm super proud of what we were able to make over the course of 10 days, and our team seemed to really click and work well together. On the day the jam wrapped up, everybody's games went live, and we had the opportunity to give each and every one a shot. While I wasn't able to play every single game, I'm blown away by the quality of the games that everyone produced. A ton of love and care went into so many of these games, and I am honored to have been a part of the second Vimjam. Be sure to go check out Sid Fish and MightyJor's channels and see what they've been up to. If you like the music in the game, MightyJor released a music pack on his itch page where you can grab the main theme and a number of different versions of it too. Sid Fish's game Pushy Worm officially has a Steam page now. If you're interested in fun puzzlers, be sure to check it out too. And from me to you, as always, stay positive, keep creating, and share your gifts with the world.